I'm going to start the recording now, so if you have colleagues who weren't able to join us live, they will be able to, of course, access that live or the recording. We'll post it to the YouTube channel and on various Schoology sites soon. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, who is our Fearless ACES coordinator. Go ahead, Stephanie.
All right, thanks, Patsy. I want to welcome everyone. I know it can be hard to find time for a webinar like this when you've got a lot of other work to do. So thank you very much for making this part of your day today. There are a few materials I was hoping you would have access to during the webinar, and those are listed here on this screen. And you can find them by clicking on the Materials tab. So hopefully you'll be able to view those, or you already have those in front of you for the webinar today. All right. So my name is Stephanie Sommers. I am the ACES coordinator through ATLAS, and I also work for Minneapolis Public Schools, where I am the adult diploma coordinator and the writing curriculum team lead. And I've put my my email address right there on the screen. If you have any questions after today's webinar, or there are maybe materials you'd like copies of, or things that you wanted me to follow up on with you, please feel free to reach out and I will get back to you as soon as I can. We also have Patsy Egan with us today. You heard Patsy just a moment ago. Patsy, of course, is the director at ATLAS. And if you have any tech problems during our webinar, please feel free to use the chat box and reach out to Patsy, and she will be able to assist you. We also have Astrid Leiden from the Department of Education joining us today as a guest. So we're well covered. If we have any issues or if you have questions, it's a great opportunity to ask all of the people who are joining us today. All right, so here are some of our objectives for today's webinar. I'm hoping that by the end of our session, you will understand what is meant by the term transparency when it comes to lesson planning and creating assignments, and what are the factors that contribute to a transparent assignment. We're going to talk about the benefits of creating more transparent assignments and how they can help your learners. I will talk a little bit about the connection between ACES TIF and developing transparent assignments, but not just ACES TIF, really any content standards. There's a connection between how we specifically call out the skills in a lesson and those content standards. And then throughout the webinar, I will be referencing some resources if you want to learn more about transparency, and I've tried to put all the websites on the slides so that you can see them. The slides are also available for download from the Materials tab, so you would be able to have those after the webinar if you wanted any of those websites. All right, so that's what we're going to be working on today. To get started, I thought we'd try out our chat box a little bit. So we're going to talk about the what and why. So what does it mean to develop transparent assignments? What do you think of when you hear the term transparency? What qualities do you think a transparent assignment would possess? And then if we think about that, how might it benefit learners to create more transparent assignments? So Patsy is modeling for us where we can chat out our answers in the chat box. I understand sometimes it's hard to respond to multiple questions at once. So if you even just want to pick one of those questions to chat about, that would be great. So what other terms or ideas do you associate with transparency? What do you think would be some qualities of a transparent assignment? And how would a transparent assignment benefit learners? So it would be great, because we don't have just tons and tons of participants today. So it'd be great if we could have a small but active group on this webinar. So Patsy put in, I think of students really getting what it is they are learning at any given time, being able to articulate to someone what they are working on. I think that's great. And actually, the idea that a student could not do that, could not articulate what they were working on, is one of the things that got me interested in this topic of transparency. And Christine wrote, I think that transparency means that students clearly understand the purpose and process of the instruction they are receiving. Learners may feel increased motivation if they clearly see how instruction matches their goals. Yes, so definitely transparency is related to increased motivation, and we'll see more about that in a few moments. Then we had Matt jumped into the chat and said, one quality I think of would be clearly stated goals and objectives. Yes. So in terms of transparency, that would be under the topic of purpose. And definitely having a clearly stated purpose is part of a transparent assignment. Astrid said, student understanding and be able to articulate the why. Yes, again, the purpose. Why am I doing this? What's the reason? What's the benefit? And Patsy said, also assessment, they know they are going to be judged or graded. Yes. Okay, so thank you everyone for chatting out. And Carolyn says, I think, oh great, no one answered this question. So Carolyn says, I think it would benefit students as they would have clear direction and clear feedback regarding their performance as they move through the lesson. Perfect. And Carol says, I think assessment matching the big ideas of assignments is transparency. Yes, so that idea that we are assessing our students on the main objectives from an assignment. So in other words, when there is an assessment, it's matched up and clearly related to what we were hoping would be the big takeaways from the unit. I know, for an example, sometimes when I work out of a book like Ventures, you know, I'll go through the unit with my students, and then at the end, I'll be previewing the unit test. And occasionally, not all the time, there will be a question on that test about something that I would have considered such a small part of that unit, some real discrete grammar point, or they seem to pay a lot of attention maybe to a particular word. And I have wondered before, you know, why is this part of the assessment out of this whole unit? So I definitely think that our students should understand why every question or every piece of an assessment, why and how that matches with the goals for the unit or lesson. So thank you everyone for chatting. I know that sometimes we just want to sit back and enjoy the dulcet tones of a webinar, but I really do appreciate you being you chatting out and sharing your ideas, because it makes it much more interesting for everyone involved. So thank you. You've done a great job thinking about those questions and kind of getting into this topic. And so now I'm going to take you through a little bit of the research behind this idea of transparency. So transparent teaching and learning methods explicitly focus on how and why students are learning course content in particular ways. So like many of you brought up in the chat, if a student can answer those questions, how is this going to benefit them and why are they learning it? Then you have probably, as a teacher, created a more transparent assignment. So the idea of transparency, when at least the research I have done, is mostly based on the work of a woman named Mary Ann Winkelmus, and she is the principal investigator and founder of the Transparency in Learning and Teaching in Higher Education project. So they turned that into the acronym TILT. Tilt Higher Ed is the name of the website. And so the definition we saw on the previous slide comes from Mary Ann, and a lot of the materials we'll be looking at in the webinar were also developed by her. or by people who were sort of working on her research. So she is also the executive director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at Brandeis University. And much of Dr. Winklemas's work has been focused on improving higher education learning and teaching, especially for historically underserved students. So when we think about the students we work with in ABE, many of them coming from backgrounds where maybe they have not had strong success in formal education, maybe they have not had a lot of people in their family to whom they could look for help when it came to making their way through an educational pathway. And these are the kinds of students that she was hoping to help when she started thinking about this idea of transparency. All right. So in 2014 and 2015, a group of 7 minority serving institutions launched a pilot project that included 1,180 students and 35 faculty. The main research goal was to study how faculty transparency about the design and problem-centered nature of student assignments would affect students' learning experiences and the quality of student work. So basically, they were trying to explore, were there things that teachers and instructors could do when creating their assignments that would help students to have more success and to create products that were more in line with, I think, what the teachers were envisioning when they created the assignment, if that kind of makes sense. And again, really focusing on students who were historically underserved in these learning institutions. And so when they concluded their research, what they found was students who received more transparency reported gains in 3 areas that are important predictors of student success. So there's academic confidence, sense of belonging, and mastery of skills that employers most value when hiring. So the last one really puts me in mind of ACES and the Developing a Future Pathways category, but really the whole ACES TIF, when that was developed, it was really developed with input about what would help students succeed, what skills do they need to succeed in the workplace and in higher education. So we really wanted to think about what would employers value and how could we help students to develop those skills. So there's a connection right there. And then, of course, helping students develop academic confidence. If they feel like they know what they're being asked to do, and if they feel like they understand how to tackle those tasks, that is going to increase confidence. And then a sense of belonging. I think, again, if students are not struggling in their classes, if they feel like they are able to fully participate in the academic community, they are going to have a stronger sense of belonging. And so when I look at these 3 areas, I think of the students that we work with in ABE and how we would want them to have these 3 things: more confidence, a greater sense of belonging, and a mastery of these skills. Okay, and so I pulled one quote out of the research. While the benefits for all students in the aggregate who received more transparency were statistically significant, the benefits for first-generation, low-income, and underrepresented students were greater. And so these are our students, and this, I'm hoping the purpose of me putting this information in here was to sort of explain to you why we, we in ABE might be interested in creating more transparent assignments. It's so we can help our students be more successful. All right, so we are going to now get into the specifics of transparency. The research that I have looked at breaks transparency into 3 areas. There is clearly defining the purpose, clearly defining the task, and then clearly defining the success criteria for an assignment. And so for the next few slides, the next little while, we're going to look at each of those areas. We're going to see a more and less transparent example, and we're going to be trying to understand what each of these categories means before we try to apply them a little later on by looking at an assignment that I have used as an example. So the purpose of the assignment, what is your why? And let's see here. So here are some of the ways that we can think about purpose when it comes to transparency. So a specific purpose fosters a deeper appreciation of the value of the assignment. If students understand what they are being asked to do and how it's going to benefit them, the idea is that they are going to put more time and energy into doing that assignment. The purpose, when it's clearly defined, helps learners understand why they are being asked to do the task. The purpose tells learners what knowledge and skills they will gain from doing the assignment. It highlights the transferable nature of the knowledge and skills. So how is it going to benefit me right now on this assignment, but also maybe in my academic pursuits as the whole, and beyond that, how could it transfer into my career or life outside of school? So that hits on the next one. It explains how the knowledge and skills relate to learners' real lives. And then, as we already touched on, a well-defined purpose motivates students to spend more time thinking about their work. I know oftentimes when I give an assignment to my learners, I tend to think that it will be clear to them why it's important. So I mostly teach writing. I might give an assignment. We'll look at an example like this in a little while. An example, write a paragraph for me. And I tend to think that students are just going to understand that writing's an important academic skill and that we need to be clear communicators in order to be successful. But I think the idea of transparency is that we're not just making the assumption that students are going to value the same things that we value. We're going to show them why they should value those things by making it clear what the purpose is. So here is an example of a transparent assignment template. So this was developed, as you can see, by Marianne Winklemus. This template is in your materials tab and also available on the Tilt Higher Ed website. So this template just sort of breaks down the different areas. So for purpose here, she says, define the learning objectives in language and terms that help students recognize how this assignment will benefit their learning. Indicate how these are connected with institutional learning outcomes, or in ABE, we might say connected to our standards or connected to the learning objectives that are associated with a course maybe, and how the specific knowledge and skills involved in this assignment will be important in students' lives beyond the context of this assignment, this course, and this college or program. And then you can see where under the purpose, we have an area for the skills and an area for the knowledge. And so, I don't know, maybe the rest of you, when you look at knowledge and skills, you can clearly differentiate between the two. But as I was getting ready for this webinar earlier today, I really thought to myself, what is the difference between skills and knowledge? And so I spent a little time thinking about that and looking on the internet to see what others said. And one way to differentiate that I was able to kind of get my head around is knowledge is sort of the theory behind something, and skills is how you would apply that theory. And so knowledge might be the framework for something, and the skills would be how you would apply the different pieces. So I have an example later on for a writing assignment where I talk about text structure. So I guess knowledge would be knowing that texts are organized into different types of structures, and being able to identify the different types would be knowledge. And then the skill might be being able to organize your own piece of writing according to a particular text structure or for a specific purpose. So that was kind of how I was thinking about these two. If anyone has different ideas, I would love to hear them, and please feel free to use the chat box. But we do want to be thinking about both knowledge and skills when we define our purpose. Okay. So here I have, again, from the TILT website, they have examples of different course syllabi, and they have a less transparent example and a more transparent example. And so I was wondering, if we look at the less transparent example on the left, the more transparent example on the right, what do you notice as a difference between these two syllabi? Is there anything that you noticed that you could chat out in the chat box? So these are for the same assignment, and one is a less transparent example, the other one is a more transparent example. And Caroline says the due date is one of the first items shared. Yeah, you know, in fact, it is a due date, but it's also, there's actually sort of a timeline or a breakdown of when the different tasks or benchmarks for completing the larger project would be due. So that's great. Patsy says the more transparent one is easier to read. We've got some headings there that do make it easier to read. Lori says more specific reasons for the assignment on the second example. Yes, so we can clearly see what is the purpose. What am I hoping to gain? I'm going to make an informed decision about the major or career I am considering. Yes, Astrid says there's no information about the purpose. Right, so the less transparent assignment is really a description of the task. There is really not a purpose, not really a purpose stated. Okay, so great. Those are all things I was hoping you would notice. Again, this example and other examples are available from the TILT website of more and less transparent assignments. So these are to kind of give you an idea, a concrete idea of what we're talking about here. I also want to say, it looks like my neighbors have just started a bit of an air duct cleaning project. If you hear a slight humming in the background, I apologize about that. That's
just so you know, I don't hear anything, Stephanie. It's okay.
Thank you, Patsy. All right. So let's keep going then. So that was in a nutshell about the purpose. And now we're going to talk about the next part of a transparent assignment, which is the task. Okay. So task defines what activities the learner should do or perform. Task is the part of an assignment that teachers traditionally spend the most time explaining or put the most energy into. For a more transparent assignment, it is suggested that we break the task into steps and recommend a sequence for completion. And then in the research that I have been looking at, they talk about using Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives to guide the creation of assignment cues or question cues. And so we'll look at what that means. And there was something about Bloom's that we added to the materials tab. So here we have an example. I got this from the Pearson website. So one level of Bloom's taxonomy is knowledge. A description for that might be recognizes students' ability to use rote memorization and recall certain facts. And so in the next column, you see some verbs that you could put into your task description to explain what the students will be doing. So they might cite, define, identify, label, list, match name, recall, recognize, reproduce, select, and state. And all of those would be recalling knowledge, okay, or facts. And then a sample objective using that language would be students will recall the 4 major food groups without error. The students will list at least 3 characteristics peculiar to the Cubist movement, okay? So this is one example of using Bloom's taxonomy to define your task. This again at the top is how task is defined from that sample template. So the template I showed you for creating more transparent assignments. Under task on the template, here is what it says. Task, define what activities the student should do or perform. Question cues from this chart might be helpful. That chart is in your materials tab. List any steps or guidelines or a recommended sequence, okay? Specify any extraneous mistakes to be avoided. So if there's something that you anticipate your students might get wrong, something that you've noticed in the past that students struggle with, calling that out in the task would make it more transparent. If there are sound pedagogical reasons for withholding information about how to do the assignment, protect students' confidence and sense of belonging in college with a purpose statement, something like this. The purpose of this assignment is for you to struggle and feel confused while you invent and test your own approach for addressing the problem. So I thought this was really interesting, and I read some teachers' blogs about using transparent assignments. And this idea that you actually would write into your assignment that it's meant to feel challenging or that the students might engage in productive struggle. And the reason for that is so that students who do struggle while doing the assignment, that if they know it's a normal and expected part of the process, they will be less likely to quit and give up or to start feeling negatively towards themselves or the assignment because they understand that that is what is expected. Okay, so the idea of defining the task is you're trying as the instructor to think of ways that the students could be successful, but also calling out barriers or pitfalls that you want them to avoid and writing as much of that as you can into the task description for the assignment, okay? And so that Bloom question cues chart here, I have a little picture of so we can see the first level of questions, just remembering information. So these are some sentence stems or question frames, right? What is, how is, when did such and such happen, how did it happen, what is the definition of? Next to that, we have a higher level skill, analyzing, of course. And these are some different question cues. How would you classify? What evidence can you find? What is the relationship between? How can you make a distinction between? And so I noticed some people are chatting. This is so great. Christine says, I think it's very important to let students know a task is challenging, but I have to set the task up to make sure they have support from me and from others. Yes, so I definitely don't think we get off the hook if we just say, well, this is going to be hard for you. Good luck. I think letting them know that it might be challenging can be useful so that a student doesn't feel like they're doing it wrong or failing when they run into trouble, but then setting up supports and letting them know where they can come for help when they feel that challenge. So that's a really great point. And Carolyn says, agreed. So interesting to share that information about the expectation to struggle. Sometimes when I'm setting up an assignment for students, I say, and I'm sure you do too, in the past, I have had students struggle with this, or in the past, here's an area that I would encourage you to pay extra attention to, or has been, I know students have had a little confusion about. So calling those kinds of things out. And Christine says she lets students know that support will be there. Yes, so this might be challenging for you. The challenge is how we grow, but you are not alone, and I am here to support you. I think that's really important. Great. Thank you for chatting and for sharing your thoughts. That's fantastic. So here we have the task, and then we have the more and less transparent examples of task as it shows up in a syllabi. So on the left, we have the less transparent example. So again, this is sort of, remember, this was all that was included. You saw this on the last screen too, because there was no purpose. So the part on the left is the same as what we saw before, or almost the same. The part on the right is what's changed a little bit. So what do you notice? What are, and there might not be quite as many things as with purpose, but what are a few of the things that are different about the task as it's defined when it's less transparent and more transparent? Can anyone chat out maybe something that you notice about how the more transparent task is defined compared to the less transparent task? One thing that I noticed is in the more transparent number 6, the instructor has explained exactly what the paper should look like when it's turned in. So instead of just saying write a 400 to 500 word reflection paper, now the task is more defined. Compare and contrast the information, and I want 8 pages, 1.5 space, 12-point font, Times New Roman, 1-inch margins. That documents the advantages and disadvantages of a career in the select field. So the first assignment, you're sort of gathering the information. In the more transparent assignment, it's more clear what you're supposed to do with the information. Christine says in number 3, there's much more information about the types of questions in citations. Yes, so letting students know what citation guidelines they need to use. APA, they need 5 sources, or the questions must be based on a review of the field using 5 credible sources as defined by the librarian, so very specific. And then Carolyn says point 1 gives students choices in multiple perspectives. Select 2 professionals in your prospective academic discipline and or career field that are considered experts in an area in which you are interested. Yes. And so people are able to choose what that field is, and then maybe choosing who they would speak to based on their interests. Yes, excellent. So one of the things that comes up in the literature about transparent assignments is sort of about the idea of cognitive load. And when students have a very clear idea from the start of what the teacher is looking for, what it's meant to look like, how it should be formatted, the more information you can give about what exactly the students are producing, the more the students are able to focus on content rather than things like formatting, for example. So if we think about someone who doesn't come from a background where they've just written lots and lots of papers or done lots and lots of academic tasks, getting caught up in not knowing if I'm doing it right, not knowing what it's supposed to look like. I know I have had the experience many times where students will come to me, maybe they'll answer one question and they just want me to tell them if they've done it right. And if I can tell them, yes, that's right, that's what I was looking for, you can really see their whole body relax, and then they're able to sort of go on and complete the rest of the assignment. So I think anything that we can do to lessen that anxiety and let students know exactly what it will look like when they've done something right or when they have met the expectations for the assignment helps them to focus more on being creative, employing their research skills, and really thinking about what they want to say in their voice. All right, so we have now explained task, which is the second component of transparency. So we had purpose, now we have task, and we're going to now move on to success criteria. So I do think at least in my program, in my experience with ABE, a lot of teachers do a pretty good job with touching on at least success criteria. So I know a lot of people, when they give assignments, they do include a rubric or a checklist so that students know what things will be, what points they will be evaluated on. What's interesting about transparency is it goes beyond providing those guidelines like a rubric or a checklist. And it talks, if you look at the third bullet point here, it talks about providing an annotated example to show learners what you are looking for in a response. Okay, so the first part of success criteria, basically you're explaining how the assignment will be evaluated. I think most people do that. It's part of writing a clear, part of lesson planning. When we write an objective, right, we explain how we will assess the objectives. So is it going to be a presentation? Is it going to be a piece of writing? Is it going to be answers to questions? So I think we do that. And as I already mentioned, I know a lot of people use checklists or rubrics, but I know for myself as a writing teacher, I have not been in the habit of giving my students an annotated example to show them what I'm looking for. And when I really think about it, I think part of it is because I have this idea that if I gave my students an example, then they would copy my example or somehow be influenced by my example, and that might limit somehow their own creativity or their own voice when it comes to creating their own response. That's kind of been my fear, I think. And then also just time, of course. Creating an annotated example would take more time. It would mean I would actually have to sit down and create something, and that something would have to be a pretty good model for what I want. And then Christine says they may mimic your annotated sample, but students have to start somewhere. Yes, and so after doing this research and kind of digging into this topic, I have realized it's a little bit like using sentence or paragraph frames. When we provide those to learners, yes, in a way we are maybe limiting their creativity, but we are also creating a more equal playing field for students who did not grow up immersed in the idea of academic language, for example. And we are showing them we are giving them the support to show them what the structure of the answer should look like, so that, again, they can focus more on the content. And so I have become really interested in this idea of giving an example. When I write my own example, I also then really get in touch with all of the pieces of doing the assignment, and that helps me to better explain the task, right? So sometimes we might not really, if we're not doing what we're asking our students to do, it might be hard for us to clearly break down all of the steps involved. But if we take the time to write a sample response, we're going to be more in touch with what we're asking our students to do. And it might be an opportunity for us to discover that we need to add more scaffolding or support as well. And then the last suggestion about creating a clear success criteria is helping or working with your students and providing opportunities for them to give input about what should be included in this assignment. So again, if I think about my writing class, and maybe we've spent a week or 2 weeks, when I think about spending a week or 2 weeks talking about a particular type of writing. So Christine knows that last winter, about a year ago, I was struggling with working with my students on writing definition paragraphs. And so it's a part of our book. We use the Great Writing Book. And I really was having a hard time figuring out what is a definition paragraph in relation to maybe just another kind of paragraph, like a process paragraph. How is it different from a narrative paragraph? And so I really had to write one for myself, think about the different pieces to include. And once I had done that, it was easier for me to break down that task for my students. And I think when we spend time, like I do in my writing class, talking about a particular style of writing, be that comparison, contrast, cause and effect, problem solution, narrative, we spend a great deal of time talking about the language of writing, the structure of the type of writing. And so by the time we're ready to do our summative task and create paragraphs, my students are in a good place to talk about what they think should be included. I want my students to be able to tell me, well, I know this paragraph needs a topic sentence. I know this paragraph should use these transition words. I know that my supporting details should include some explanation and examples. And so I think another way of kind of doing formative assessment with students is if they are able to provide input into that success criteria, because that really lets me know that they have understood what the important takeaways are from that unit. So that is something that I'm going to work on more in the future, is getting learner input into creating those rubrics and checklists. Okay. So again, from that transparent assignment template, here's where it talks about the criteria for success. And you are maybe looking at this right now as well. Define the characteristics of the finished product. Provide multiple examples of what these characteristics look like in real-world practice to encourage students' creativity and reduce their incentive to copy any one example too closely. I'm going to skip ahead a little. Discuss how excellent work differs from adequate work. This enables students to evaluate the quality of their own efforts while they are working and to judge the success of their completed work. It is often useful to provide or compile with students a checklist of characteristics of successful work. And then going to the end, later asking students to reflect and comment on their completed graded work allows them to focus on changes to their learning strategies, right? Great ACES term there, that might improve their future work. So these are all things that we can do to make our assignments more transparent. And one thing that I want to make clear is there's a lot of pieces here. There's working more on the purpose, defining the task, creating these annotated examples. The Tilt website actually does a good idea or a good job of pointing out some ideas, little things you can do with your students to start creating a larger culture of transparency. So if you don't already work with your students to define the success criteria, that could be one step towards creating more transparent assignments. If you don't now encourage your students to reflect and comment on their completed work and the grade, quote unquote grade, or the evaluation that you gave them, we want to have conversations with our students about how they perceive their performance with how we perceive their performance. If you're not doing that, that could be another step towards transparency. So don't think that you have to change all of these things at once. You could make it your goal to work on different pieces incrementally, maybe each time you create a new assignment or update an old one. All right, so here is an example of what it would look like to provide that annotated example of successful work. So showing this to students and talking about it before they start the assignment. And this is part of a longer document that I did include in your materials called Transparent Assignments Promote Equitable Opportunities for Student Success. These were some materials, again, created by Winklemus and her team. And so you can see on the left is the annotated comments. So it says use invented triangle to organize introduction. First give big picture context. I believe that should be inverted triangle. Anyways, and then the topic sentence of the paragraph, all sentences in paragraph relate to this topic. So I want to make sure my students know they need a topic sentence and reminding them all the sentences should be related. Then we do background information. Key references, you'll notice the parenthetical citations. No direct quotations, only paraphrases with sources. Proper literature format used. Importance of the study is highlighted. Why should reader care, right? So we know that we don't just include a quote or a paraphrase, we have to link it back to our main point or topic sentence so that it's clear to our readers why I thought that was important information to include in my piece of writing. And then in the second paragraph, prior studies or observations, data relevant to specific studies. So really calling out the features of this academic piece of writing, this research paper, that are going to make it exceptional rather than just okay or so-so. All right, I would be very interested to know if anyone is currently using annotated examples of successful work. If you do that in your classroom, first of all, I want to say congratulations to you. And I would love to know if you have a kind of an example, you could chat out in the chat box, because this is something that I've been really interested in since starting this research. All right, so continuing on here. So we have just gone through the 3 parts of creating a transparent assignment. We talked about the purpose and how a clearly defined purpose can help us and our students. We talked about the task, and we talked about the success criteria. Now, I thought that we could maybe dig in a little bit to an example assignment and just talk about some ways that we could make it more transparent. So one thing that I was a little bit interested in to learn about myself is when I was looking for an assignment to use for this website, I learned I don't have a lot of great, really transparent assignments just ready to go. I think I would like to think I do provide for my students examples of what I'm looking for, not annotated examples, but we do use model texts. I do provide a lot of graphic organizers and scaffolding, and we do a lot of think alouds and group work. But when I really looked through some of the assignments I had saved, there was not an excellent transparent example. So this is something I pulled out of my Schoology course. This is an assignment from a pre-GED writing class, and this is the actual assignment that my students saw. For this assignment, you will need to compare two subjects using either the block or point-by-point method. Be sure to follow the following format rules. Name in upper corner, titled centered and with correct capitalization, paragraph is indented, and paragraph is double spaced. And I will tell you, I probably thought that was a lot of information. And then, you know, we've been talking about comparisons for a while, and I thought the students would be ready to go. They'd seen other examples, and obviously, looking now at this assignment through the lens of transparency, I realized this is far from a transparent assignment. So I'm asking for some ideas of how we could fix this. That's what we're going to do now. Christine shared something in the chat box. She said, I will use a model and think aloud to annotate it with students taking notes on their copies, but I do not generally hand out an annotated copy. I think I need to start giving them a concrete annotated sample they can sit with and refer back to. It would also help students who miss class. Yes, I think I've done something similar. So I have talked through a model piece of writing and called out the different parts, for example. So this is the background knowledge, this was their hook, this was a transition between ideas, those kinds of things. But then if a student wasn't in class that day, they might not have those notes. And again, because I didn't create the model in all cases, I think the way we think through it is different when we find a model. So yeah, these are all things to think about going forward. So here is my not great example of an assignment, and there's, I think, lots of room here for making this more transparent. So we're going to first think about in terms of purpose. How could that assignment be made more transparent by better defining the purpose? So remember, the assignment involves writing a comparison paragraph. So if I were going to better explain the purpose, I'm asking you to think about, why is it important for students to know how to organize and write a comparison paragraph? What specific skills and knowledge would they gain from writing a comparison paragraph? And how might these skills and knowledge be transferable to other areas? So once again, I'm going to ask you to go to the chat box and think about, what could I add to this assignment that would better define the purpose for the learners? Okay, so again, I'll go back here. This is what I have right now. Not very much. In fact, I'm ashamed to say there is no purpose mentioned at all. So how could I do a better job? I think, Matt says, I think that providing an annotated example can also save you from having to provide so many formatting requirements in the instructions. Yes, because what do they say? A picture is worth 1,000 words. And thus time and space for defining the purpose and highlighting the skills and knowledge gained. Yes, I think you're right. If I can just show them what it would look like and annotate, this is 12-point font, my margins are 1 inch, I wouldn't have to lay all that out. That's a great point, Matt. Okay. So again, we're thinking about, what are some of the purposes when I think about doing writing, academic writing, specifically writing a comparison piece. how does learning how to do that? Why do we ask students to do that? It's a very common task. It's in lots of different writing textbooks. Why is that important for students? Okay, excellent. Adam says, comparing the use of evidence. That's a critical thinking skill. Excellent, excellent. Any other ideas about what skills and knowledge, or why, just why do we ask students to do that kind of writing? Matt says, not only can it allow for time, but it can also focus your assignment instructions on purpose, right? So I wouldn't maybe need a full page for the task, and that would make the purpose more, I think what you're trying to say is it would make it more noticeable and stand out and not get lost in tons and tons of specific formatting information. I think that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that, Matt. And Carol says inference skills. Yes, okay, for writing a comparison. Yep, perfect. Here are some of my ideas. So the first thing that comes to mind is the extended response on the GED RLA test can easily be written as a comparison. For any of you who aren't at that GED level, for the RLA test, what used to be called the essay and is now called the extended response, students are given two texts they're on the same topic or issue, but from two different points of view. Students need to read the text, analyze the arguments being made, and then they can set up their essay, which is sort of their analysis, as a comparison between the two texts. And that structure works really well, but to be able to do that, they need to understand what are the features of a comparison essay or paragraph. Carolyn says, I am just thinking about the compare to subjects. This could be a place to further clarify. Yes, and it's interesting you mentioned that, Carolyn, because I thought, for the purposes of the webinar, should I go back and tweak that? Although at the time, that was what my students saw, and try to make it more specific, like 2 jobs, 2 climates. It could be 2 classes you've taken. Exactly. So giving some examples of the 2 subjects, I think would be great. Or is this a research experience? So give more guidance here as well. Or would you have them read 2 text, as is the evidence-based writing? Yes, excellent. So clearly defining exactly, is it just any 2 subjects? Or do I want them to do some independent research online and compare 2 things? Great questions. Those would be great things to call out in the task. And so another idea I had here for the purpose, the why is this important? Of course, comparison writing is one of the most common types of academic writing. So students will be doing it if they go on to college and they take a basic composition course. They would probably be asked to write a comparison. And then teaching students to recognize different types of text structure improves reading comprehension. And so if I included some information on my assignment telling students some of these things or all of these things, might they be more interested in doing the assignment? Or might they take the assignment more seriously? Might they think the assignment was more worthy of their time? I also think for sure, doing a comparison, we can relate it to how we make decisions in our own lives. I think about choosing between 2 insurance providers, for example, choosing between 2 cars or 2 types of cars, like buying a hybrid car or a standard car. Having students gather that information and make their argument is all related to critical thinking, and it's all related to the thought process that we go through when making those kinds of decisions as well. So I might add to the purpose that comparing things is sort of an everyday task, something we do in our lives, and we want to make sure that we are doing it well, that we have an organized way of approaching making comparisons so that we know that we make the best decision based on that information. So here, these might be some of the ideas I would add into my purpose. And then again, when we talk about what knowledge and skills would the students possibly gain. So I'll be honest, I told you before, I did some time thinking about knowledge and skills, and I really tried to suss them out. And Carolyn, so content knowledge. So if I had said we're going to think about 2 types of jobs, or that either you've had in the past or you might have in the future, the knowledge here could be more content specific, like understand important criteria when choosing a job, something like that. But since I left that so open-ended, it made it harder to specifically call out the knowledge. And so that's another reason for having a clear purpose, because then we really do know what content the students are going to be working with. So mine is pretty general. By completing this assignment, you will gain the following important knowledge in the area of reasoning through language arts. Recognize when a text uses the compare and contrast structure. Identify common transition words that signal comparison and contrast. So this is helping students recognize it and identify it. And then again, the skills is how would they apply it in their own work. So what are the skills in the area of academic writing? And I took these, maybe you'll recognize from CCRS and ACES TIFF. Write informative explanatory texts. Develop a topic with relevant facts and concrete details. Organize, analyze, and illustrate relationships between components and ideas. Use appropriate transition words to create cohesion and clarify relationships between ideas. Choose appropriate register for audience and purpose. And when I think about maybe another reason for calling out these knowledge and skills is for myself as well, to know if I am creating standards aligned lessons and units. And I think about in my program in Minneapolis, every course has benchmarks. And one of the ways when we conference with students is in relation to benchmarks. Well, have you met this benchmark? What's the evidence of you having met this benchmark? So if I'm listing those out as skills in my assignments, then when it comes time to conference and know if students are ready to advance to the next level, I've really thought about whether this assignment aligns with those benchmarks, and I can incorporate that into my conferencing and talking with students about what they're doing in class. And so I think then it also has a strong purpose for me as a teacher. So here were some of my ideas. You might have other ideas about the knowledge and skills you might gain from doing a piece of comparison writing. If you have any more ideas, please do chat them out. And I appreciate how active people are being in the chat today. All right, so we were talking about the purpose, okay? Now we're going to talk about the task. So my task was not particularly well defined. Here again, here was my task. For this assignment, you will need to compare 2 subjects. And then basically, as Matt called out in the text, or in his chat, basically all of my task was just about formatting, not really anything else about the task. So not so much for the students to go on. So how could the task be better defined? What are the steps that students should take in order to successfully complete this writing assignment? What would a good sequence be for completing these tasks? So I have some ideas that I'll show you, but if you, when we look at my steps and sequence, if I've missed anything, please do chat that out. So we want to better define the task, and a big part of that is explaining to students what the discrete pieces of the assignment are, kind of a task analysis. Also, if you can think of any ways that students might struggle with this, any potential pitfalls that you think we should call out, it would be great to use the chat box to chat those. Here's what I came up with to try to add a little more clarity to the task. So I've got choose 2 subjects and have them approved by your instructor. And again, I could add more information to that, like Carolyn said. Complete a graphic organizer that shows how you will compare your 2 subjects. What are your points of comparison? Choose an organizational pattern. So I teach my students point by point or block method. Start with a topic sentence that clearly shows you are writing a comparison paragraph. Again, I think right there, if I had an annotated example, I could show my students what that would look like. Include specific details and examples to support your main point. So I try to teach my students the PI method: point, information, explanation, or example. And so how are we going to apply that to this? And then end your paragraph with a concluding sentence that makes a prediction, gives an opinion, or offers a suggestion. Those are some of the ways that our book, Great Writing, talks about adding or concluding a paragraph. In the chat, Carol says, I'd add links for point by point or block method for students to refer to. Yes, so I want to say these would have been things we would have gone over in class, but as Christine pointed out earlier, students might have missed that day, and by not including all of that in the assignment, I am disadvantaging students who might have not have been here and making it harder for them to access this assignment. So that's a great idea. If compare contrast is really new to students, I might have them compare and contrast 2 pictures orally with some sentence stems, frames, signal words to get them using appropriate compare contrast text structure, words, phrases. Yep. And if we did that, then maybe I could include just like Carol said, adding links. I might include reference to some of those frames with this assignment for students who maybe missed that or need that extra support. And then I'd like to add a couple of tasks that address editing. Oh, thank you. Oh, I can't believe I forgot that. Use a classroom rubric on your own before submitting to teacher, or meet with a peer and edit, then submit edit comments as a mini assignment. Yes, yes, yes. I usually do stress using all the steps in the writing process that we plan, we draft, we write, we edit, and I can't believe you're right. I forgot to put those here, and that would be a great thing to add to this list of tasks. All right, thank you very much. So we've talked about purpose now and task, and so the last thing would be success criteria. And so I will show you that in Schoology, I did have sort of a rubric that I attached to this assignment so that students can see what different areas they're going to be assessed. So the criteria here, this matches up with our course benchmarks, and our course benchmarks are pretty well aligned with CCRS. So write informative explanatory tasks, that's the larger objective. Task, purpose, and audience. Use the writing process, you can see that's in my rubric. Use technology, that's mostly about the formatting and how the paper's submitted. And then we've got some language objective around verbs and sentence variety. And so we do this, we use a rubric where they're either at target, so a 4 means they're at target, and we try to define a little bit what that would look like. 3 means they're approaching, and a 5 means they're above. And then in Schoology, we can add comments to this I also usually provide a paper copy of my rubrics, and I have students self-assess their work, and then I go ahead and I assess, and then we kind of compare our comments and see where they overlap and where they differ. So if there are other ideas about the success criteria that you would like to share, please go ahead and chat those out. I'm sure that there are ways this could be improved. I do not have an annotated example as one thing that could definitely be added. All right. So those were the different pieces of transparency that I really wanted to touch on, that there are three important or crucial elements to a transparent assignment: purpose, task, and success criteria. The Tilt website is a great place to go to get more information and examples and materials. They've got some templates, some videos, those kinds of things on the website that you can download. I recently wrote an article about creating transparent assignments in the Minnesota ABE Connect newsletter, and then we added the Transparency in Learning and Teaching, the TILT website, to the ACES resource library in the category of learning strategies. So if any of you are new or need a little refresher, the ACES resource library, this is what it looks like now that the Atlas website has been received its upgrade. It's been redesigned, and so we go under key activities. ACES is one of the key activities, or you can also click on resources. The ACES resource library is divided into 6 parts, one for each section of the TIF, and then under each section I curate a collection of resources that teachers can use to help practice the skills in that category with their learners. This one is a little bit more meta than that. This one's a little bit more for helping the teacher look at their assignments, but I put it in the learning strategies category because it has that strong connection to help. If a student understands what they're doing, it increases their confidence. And I thought that idea of becoming a better learner, learning how to learn, worked well with learning strategies. So if you haven't been here in a while, please do take a peek at the resources. A new resource is added about every other month, and there are some really great things in here that you can use with your students. So I thought, as we get ready to wrap up here, maybe folks could chat out one thing that you will take away from the webinar. Is there something that you're thinking about now, maybe a small change that you will make in the future to create either more transparent assignments, or maybe just start to create a larger culture of transparency in your classroom? Patsy wrote that she's interested in hearing takeaways. I am as well. So if this has just got you thinking about anything, maybe one little thing that you are thinking about or maybe want to explore some more, it would be great to chat out. And I would love to see what your takeaways are from this research and this idea, this framework for transparency. So go ahead and use the chat box to share that. For me, I think the purpose and spending more time on purpose and really helping my students be able to explain why and how the assignment is going to benefit them, not just right now, but also as they move forward in reaching their goals and in their larger college and career aspirations. I also am really interested in this idea of providing more annotated examples for my learners so that they really have a clear idea of what I'm asking them to do and what success would look like, what all the pieces would be. So if anyone else has something that they have kind of thought about, something that's rolling around in their mind after today's webinar, I'd love to have you share that. So we'll have the chat open. Christine says, I think I need to be more intentional when I hand out or display information about purpose, connections to prior and future learning, detailed requirements. Not only good for students in class, but also help students who missed a class get valuable information that will help them to be successful. Yeah, you know, that idea about reaching and serving our students who maybe have irregular attendance is such a great reason for doing this, and I hadn't thought about that, but it makes so much sense that when students aren't in class, having something that we can give them that really answers at least 95% of their questions, how helpful is that going to be for both you and your learners? Carol says, overall, I will try to make classroom activities transparent by increasing purpose statements and listing daily life relevance and transfer skills. Yep, I think if we can just give our students a real clear understanding of why we're doing it. I'd like to think about my math lessons, says Carolyn. I tend to lead them as standalone days, but I'd like to think about presenting this info to students as 3 or 4 day lessons. Great. I think it will help to keep the days more transparent, particularly if students miss days, as they often do, and which was my original tendency to create the day-by-day lessons. Ooh, spooky. Stephanie just mentioned this. Yes, Carolyn, you are on track. Thank you so much for sharing that. One other, just this idea of transparency, I think, you know, sometimes I hand off some of the lessons I've created either to someone else who comes in and teaches that class, or in my role as a curriculum lead to add support for the people on my writing team. And, you know, if you think about an assignment that you create through the lens of someone who just picks it up and looks at it, another teacher even, how they will understand it, it can really help you to maybe identify some of the gaps as far as explaining the purpose and the task and the success criteria can go. I sometimes do some coaching with teachers, and we often look through that lens of, if you pass this assignment or this unit off to someone else, how well could they understand it just on its face? So that's another thing to think about as for why transparency is a great practice. Matt says, I will try to focus much more on the purpose of the assignments that I am asking of my student. I see now that this will be just as beneficial for myself as a teacher as it will be for my students. I will focus my instruction more. Excellent. Thank you, Matt. Thank you all for your comments again. And as we wrap up, I think I'm going to hand it over to Patsy, and she's going to talk for a minute about some upcoming events that Atlas is sponsoring.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, for this great webinar and for sharing such great information about how we can make our assignments more transparent. Yeah, I do want to make sure people know about what's coming up. We've got the Language and Literacy Institute, of course, January 23rd and 24th coming up in just a week and a half. We're in Minneapolis at Northeast, and registration is due this Friday. So if you are interested in coming to that event, it is our largest event of the year. It's 2 full days of everything related to reading, writing, and ESL. We hope you'll join us. Registration due Friday again on the Atlas website, so take a look. You can see the full program there as well, and you register for specific sessions. You can also get CCRS English Language Arts Foundations done at that event, as well as on Friday, we're having a full day event around ESL and math. So lots of good things to look forward to. We hope you can come. 3 regional events are coming up, as always, in the spring, kicking off with Metro on March 6th. A couple weeks later, we're up at the Timberlake Lodge in Grand Rapids, and then finally ending in mid-April in Mankato. And then the next ACES webinar, topic to be determined, will be on April 23rd, again at 2 o'clock. So we hope to see you at some of those upcoming events.
All right, thank you, Patsy. And I know a few of you are chatting out some comments as we get ready to sign out, and I appreciate that. And I want you to know again, I am more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. Carol, I keep trying to respond to your comment and I keep doing it wrong. I hope you do check out the Tilt website and I hope you do find it helpful. Thank you all for your active participation. You know, it is so hard to feel like you're talking to yourself for an hour and a half. And I can't even express how much I appreciate that you are willing to chat and participate, because that really makes the time go by, and it makes the time more meaningful as well. So thank you all for being on the webinar today. There will be a second ACES webinar this spring. The topic is actually TBD at this point, and I hope that if I can ask one more thing of you, that you will receive a very short, it's like 4 questions, 5 questions evaluation when you sign off of the webinar today. If you would not mind filling that out, it would be really great. And if you have any ideas for topics for the spring webinar, I often plan based on the suggestions that I get from participants. So please let me know if you have ideas or just things you'd like to explore, things you've heard about or are wondering about. So that's about it for me. I want to thank you once again. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you, Astrid and Patsy, for all of your support. And I hope to see you all at Language and Literacy coming up later this month.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie, for all your work. I'm going to stop the recording, but we'll hang out for a couple minutes if people have any additional questions or comments. Thanks, Stephanie.